Good evening, friends, and welcome to another quiet mystery here on The Curious Case. Where are you listening from tonight, and what tea keeps you company? Settle in, because tonight's story begins not with jewels or money, but with a disappearance. A vicar's wife, gone before dawn. A mystery no one expected in peaceful Street Mary Mead. Let's begin, friends. By morning, the parsonage gate stood open. Morning stretched pale and cold across Street Mary Mead. The bells rang from the church tower, slow, steady, echoing down the lane. Each note carried through thin air and hung above the cottages like breath in frost. Inside her gate, Miss Marple stood with pruning shears, trimming the last stubborn rose stems. The smell of toast drifted faintly from her kitchen window. It mingled with the sharp scent of damp earth. Routine. That was the charm of the village, its sameness. The post always came at 8, the milk at past. Mrs. Price Ridley always waved from across the hedge and pretended not to gossip. Yet even sameness, Miss Marple knew, could hide something. A bicycle bell rang twice. Lady Bantry appeared, cheeks flushed from the cold, hat askew. She did not slow at the gate. She called out before reaching it. "Jane, you've heard, haven't you?" Miss Marple lowered her shears. "Heard what, my dear?" "Mrs. Clement. She never came home last night. Choir practice. She simply didn't appear." Miss Marple blinked. "That's unlike her." Lady Bantry nodded fiercely. "Very unlike." The vicar waited. No message, no letter, and this morning her bicycle still in the shed. The two women walked slowly down the garden path. The frost cracked faintly beneath their feet. "She's been worried lately," Lady Bantry continued. "Something about the accounts. You know how men are with parish money. But to vanish? Never." Miss Marple said nothing. She had seen that look before, the restless silence before. Truth begins to stir. They reached the lane. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, thin and uncertain. The baker's boy whistled, unaware that the village rhythm had missed a beat. "Perhaps she went to visit her sister," Lady Bantry said, half hopeful. "She has no sister," Miss Marple replied quietly. "Then to a friend?" "She would have sent word." A blackbird darted from the hedge, startling them both. Lady Bantry laughed too quickly. "You see, Jane, I'm already jumpy." "Fear travels faster than truth," Miss Marple murmured. They stopped outside the parsonage, curtains drawn. No smoke from the chimney, no sound of kettle or clatter, only the gate, swinging lightly in the wind, the latch tapping wood. Lady Bantry stared at it. "The Reverend says he thought she'd gone to bed early, but her nightdress was still folded on the chair." Miss Marple watched the gate move back and forth. Sometimes, she thought, small things tell larger stories. An unboiled kettle, an unlit fire, a door left open. She pressed her gloved hand against the fence, feeling the chill in the metal. Lady Bantry sighed. "I dare say Slack will call it nonsense. He always does." "He will," Miss Marple said softly, "until it becomes something he can't ignore." The church bell rang again, a slow, solemn note that rolled through the air and faded into silence. Miss Marple looked toward the sound, then back to the empty windows of the vicarage. The morning light seemed colder now. Lady Bantry's voice dropped to a whisper. "And no one has seen her since last night." By mid-morning the village had begun to hum, not with work, but with talk. The butcher spoke too long to the postman. The postman lingered too long at the bakery, and the bakery door swung open every few minutes for news, not bread. At the grocer's, two women whispered near the weighing scales. She wouldn't just vanish. Maybe she slipped on the bridge. Then where's her coat? No one wanted the real answer. Everyone still wanted to sound practical. Miss Marple entered quietly. She bought sugar, though she had plenty. The grocer looked up from his ledger. "Terrible business, Miss Marple. Poor Mrs. Clement. But she'll turn up, I'm sure." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said. "But tea gone cold tells longer stories than people think." He frowned. "Beg pardon?" She smiled slightly. "Nothing at all, Mr. Finch." Outside, the air held the smell of rain coming. Low clouds pressed against the thatched roofs. Miss Marple walked toward the parsonage. She passed the vicarage gate again. Still open. Still swinging. Inside the yard, the Reverend spoke with Inspector Slack. Slack looked bored, hands deep in his coat pockets. "She probably went off for air," Slack said. "Women do when nerves fray." The Reverend's face tightened. "She wasn't a nervous woman, Inspector." Slack shrugged. "They all say that. A quarrel, perhaps. She'll be home by supper." Miss Marple stood at the gate, unseen. Her eyes moved carefully. The bicycle still leaned by the wall, dust on its tires. The teapot on the windowsill stood untouched. Even from here she could see the grey crust of dried leaves around it. Nothing had been washed. Nothing had been moved. She turned back to the lane. A dog barked in the distance. A cart rattled over stones. The ordinary sounds of the village tried to cover the unease underneath. At noon she stopped by the church hall. Lady Bantry sat with Mrs. Price Ridley, whispering over hymn sheets. "She left everything," Lady Bantry said softly. "Her purse, her keys, even the grocery list." Mrs. Price Ridley nodded grimly. "That means one of two things. Either she left in a hurry, or she never left at all." Miss Marple said nothing. She watched the dust float in the sunlight near the hall windows. People always filled silence with guesses. But silence itself often said more. When she reached home, she placed the sugar on her table and sat for a long time. Her eyes drifted to her own teapot, still warm. She thought of the one at the parsonage, cold, forgotten, and then she saw it in her mind clearly. A small thing, but never by accident. A letter, lying under the sugar bowl, unopened. Dawn broke grey and quiet over Street Mary Mead. The frost on the hedges had melted into beads that slid down the leaves. Inside the parsonage, no smoke rose from the chimney, no clatter of kettle, only silence. Betty Crane, the maid, was first to notice. She had come early to light the range. The kitchen door was unlocked, though she was sure she had bolted it last night. Cold air drifted in. It smelled faintly of damp stone and coal dust. "Mrs. Clement?" she called. No answer. She stepped inside. The table was set for breakfast. Bread sliced, butter left uncovered. The teapot cold to touch. Steam had not risen here for hours. She moved toward the back passage. A draught brushed her skirt. It came from below. The cellar door stood ajar. Betty hesitated, hand on the latch. "Ma'am?" The sound of dripping water echoed from below. She took one step down, then another. Her candle flame trembled. Halfway down, the smell changed. Not just damp stone now, something heavier. Stale, almost sweet. Her eyes adjusted to the dark. At the bottom, near the coal bin, sat a shape in the half-light. A woman, still and upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The candle trembled harder. Mrs. Clement. No response. By the time Reverend Clement reached her, the neighbors were gathering outside. Dr. Haddock arrived minutes later, coat buttoned high, breath showing in the cold. He examined her with quiet care. "Heart failure," he murmured. Perhaps she fainted from the fumes. Inspector Slack appeared behind him, notebook ready. No marks of struggle. The gas pipes old. Could have leaked. He snapped the book shut. Sad business, but simple. Miss Marple stood near the doorframe, watching. Her eyes traveled from the coal heap to the small rug beside the stairs. No footprints in the dust. The floor was smooth, unmarked. She looked again at the shoes on Mrs. Clement's feet polished, spotless, dry, not a trace of coal on the soles. She spoke softly. "Doctor, if she came down here herself, wouldn't there be soot on her hem?" Haddock glanced down. The fabric was clean. Slack frowned. "Someone might have carried her," he said quickly. "Then set her down." Miss Marple's voice stayed even. "That would be strange kindness." The inspector cleared his throat. "We'll see what the coroner says." He turned to his constable, sealed the door. Outside, the bells began to toll again. Miss Marple watched the frost melt along the stone step. She folded her gloves slowly. She hadn't walked down there herself, she said. And the quiet cellar seemed to agree. Dr. Haddock straightened slowly from the still form. His hands brushed dust from his knees. The cellar was cold. The smell of old gas clung to the air, faint but sharp. He drew a breath through his sleeve. "Not long gone," he said. "Some gas in the lungs. Enough to make her faint. Not enough to kill quickly." Inspector Slack scribbled in his notebook, unimpressed. "So, accidental." The old pipe again. Miss Marple stood near the stairs. Her hands were folded neatly, her eyes calm. "She would not have come down here for gas, Inspector. The scullery has hot water." Slack grunted. "She might have smelled the leak. Tried to turn it off." "Without calling for help?" she asked. He ignored that. Dr. Haddock closed his bag. "Her heart was weak," he said. "Shock and fumes could stop it easily. Happens often in these old houses." He nodded to the constable. "Best. Let her rest now." They moved toward the door. Slack made notes between glances at the walls. No marks, no struggle, no reason to call it anything but misfortune. He spoke as if already finished. "She came down, turned the tap, fainted. The latch caught when the door swung shut. Simple as that." Miss Marple looked up at the latch. The brass was clean, too clean. The edge of the plate shone as though recently handled. "Did you touch this, Inspector?" Slack looked up. "Course not." "Why?" "It gleams," she said softly. "Yet everything else down here is dull with dust." Dr. Haddock gave a small smile. "Jane, you do look for trouble." "I look for reason," she replied. She was gentle but careful. She never liked dark places. Slack sighed. "Locks, dust, polish, none of that means murder. She slipped, fell, or fainted. Case closed." He turned to the constable. "Make sure the door's secured before you leave." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Secured?" "Yes," he said shortly. "Locked again. We'll have it opened for the coroner later." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then how did it come to be locked before we found her?" Slack stopped writing. "What do you mean?" Betty, the maid, still pale, answered quietly. "When I came down, sir, I had to push hard. The latch was set from the outside. It stuck before it opened." Slack frowned. Maybe she shut it herself. "She couldn't have," Miss Marple said gently. From where she sat, she could not reach the door, and she had no key. No one spoke. Only the sound of the dripping pipe filled the stillness. Dr. Haddock cleared his throat, uneasy now. Slack shut his notebook, slower than before. Miss Marple's eyes moved once more around the small, airless room. A locked door, a woman who could not have closed it. A life ended neatly without reason. She looked toward the steps. "Then why," she said quietly, "was the cellar door relocked from outside?" The question hung there, like the smell of gas itself. The next morning brought drizzle. Thin rain tapped against Miss Marple's window panes. She sat at her small table, a single cup of tea cooling beside her. In front of her lay the letter from the parsonage, the one Betty found under the sugar bowl. She turned it carefully. The envelope was plain, no handwriting, only the church crest stamped in faint blue ink, the seal unbroken until the constable brought it. Miss Marple lifted the flap with her knitting needle. Inside nothing. A folded sheet of clean paper, blank from edge to edge. No ink, no message. She laid it flat on the tablecloth and watched it. Sometimes paper told stories even without words. This one told silence. Lady Bantry arrived without knocking. She carried rain on her coat and impatience in her eyes. "Well, Jane, what does it say?" "Nothing." Lady Bantry frowned. "Nothing?" "Not a word," Miss Marple said. "And that, dear, is very strange." She poured another cup. Steam rose softly between them. Lady Bantry leaned closer. "Who sends a blank letter?" "Someone," Miss Marple murmured. "Who doesn't want the message written down." They sat for a while, listening to the faint rattle of rain against glass. Lady Bantry shook her head. "It gives me chills. The whole village is talking now. Slack says heart failure, and that's that." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "He would, but her shoes were clean, her door was locked, and this," she tapped the envelope, "waits under sugar." Later that afternoon, Dr. Haddock called. He had brought the vicar's thanks and the late Mrs. Clement's small belongings. Nothing of note, he said, setting a brown envelope on the table. Ring, chain, and a few coins. Miss Marple opened the packet. A small gold chain lay coiled inside. The clasp caught the light. She picked it up with 2 fingers. The links felt uneven. One had been replaced, the metal newer, brighter than the rest. "This was mended," she said. Haddock nodded. "Broken last week, I think. The Reverend said she wore it every day." She examined the clasp more closely. Cheap repair work, too rough for the village jeweller. The little loop had been forced shut with pliers. Lady Bantry peered over her shoulder. Poor thing. Sentimental, perhaps? Miss Marple shook her head. She was careful with her things. If she wanted it fixed, she'd have done it properly. The clasp clicked as she closed it again. Her fingers lingered on the catch. "Why change one link?" she said softly, "when you could buy another chain?" Haddock looked puzzled. "She wore it to church last Sunday. I saw it myself." "Yes," Miss Marple murmured, "and someone else saw it too." She set the necklace beside the blank letter. The 2 objects looked harmless, almost dull. Yet they sat, together like words in an unfinished sentence. Lady Bantry broke the silence. "What do you think it means?" Miss Marple's eyes stayed on the chain. "It means," she said, her voice low and steady, "someone wanted her to wear that exact one." The parsonage smelled of damp paper and old tea. The fire had not been lit. Books leaned in uneven rows along the wall, and a half-written sermon sat untouched on the desk. Reverend Clement stood near the window, pale, trembling slightly. He had not shaved. His collar hung loose. Inspector Slack was already there. His pencil tapped against the margin of his notebook. "Routine questions, Reverend," he said briskly. "Your wife's last evening. Any quarrel? Any illness?" The Reverend's voice came faintly. "No quarrel. She had been tired. Distracted, perhaps." He rubbed his temples. "She kept talking about the parish accounts. Said something wasn't right." Slack looked up. "Money trouble?" The Reverend shook his head quickly. "Not ours. The church fund. She thought some of the receipts were wrong. I told her she was mistaken. We'd sort it after Epiphany." Miss Marple sat quietly near the hearth. Her knitting rested in her lap, untouched. She spoke softly. "She was precise, your wife. She kept records neatly, didn't she?" The Reverend nodded. "Yes. Every penny noted. Every collection sealed before Sunday supper." Slack closed his notebook. "People make errors. Happens all the time." Miss Marple looked at him calmly. "Errors don't keep a woman awake at night, Inspector." Clement turned toward her, eyes hollow. "She was uneasy, Miss Marple. I thought it was her nerves. But she would sit by the fire with the ledger open, staring at it. Once, I found her crying. She said she had to speak with someone before morning." "Whom?" Slack asked. "She wouldn't tell me." He hesitated. "But someone came later, after supper. I heard voices in the sitting room." Miss Marple's eyes lifted. "Who was it?" The Reverend swallowed hard. "Mrs. Halling. She teaches in the Sunday school. She and my wife were close." Slack frowned. "What time was this?" "A little after 9. "And how long did she stay?" The Reverend hesitated. "I don't know. I fell asleep over my papers. When I woke, the lamp was still on, but the room was empty." Miss Marple's needles clicked once, a quiet sound in the silence. "You're certain it was Mrs. Halling?" "Yes. I saw her through the window when she arrived. She carried her black shawl. My wife let her in herself." Slack jotted it down. "Late visit for talk about hymns," he muttered. "Strange hour." The Reverend's gaze dropped to the floor. "She was kind," he said slowly. "Always helping others, perhaps too trusting." Miss Marple looked at him closely. "She often entertained visitors?" "Only women from the postlings, Tutor.com's parish. Never at that hour." Slack closed his notebook with a snap. "That's enough for now." He stood, stretching his shoulders. "We'll speak with Mrs. Halling next." The Reverend pressed a hand against the window frame. Rain pattered softly outside. He spoke without turning. She meant to tell me something important that night. His voice fell to a whisper, but I never heard it. Miss Marple's eyes stayed on him, calm and searching. He stared out into the wet morning. She let Mrs. Holling in, he said quietly, but I never saw her leave. The kitchen at the parsonage was still. No sound but the faint ticking of the clock above the mantel. The air was stale, touched with cold ash from the unused stove. Miss Marple stood in the doorway, gloved hands folded. She liked kitchens. They told the truth even when people didn't. A constable nodded as she entered. "Inspector said you might look around, ma'am. Nothing much here." She smiled gently. "There's always something, if one knows where to look." On the table sat 2 teacups, one empty, one half full. A plate of shortbread, untouched beside them. The kettle, still on its trivet, showed a white crust of lime along the spout. It had boiled hours ago. She moved closer. The air carried a faint, bitter trace, sweet at first breath, sharp at the next. She paused. "Almonds," she murmured. The constable blinked. "Baking, maybe?" "No," she said softly. "This smell doesn't belong to cake." Her eyes moved to the cups. One had been rinsed hastily. A thin trail of water ran from its rim to the saucer. The other remained dry. Dark tea settled at the bottom, cold and unmoving. The washed cup gleamed faintly, its inside spotless. Too spotless. She looked toward the sink. A damp cloth lay folded neatly beside the basin. No crumbs, no sugar spill. Everything too tidy for morning routine. She touched the handle of the washed cup. Still damp. Someone had cleaned it after the body was found or just before she died. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The rim bore no trace of lipstick, though Mrs. Clement always wore pale rose when expecting company. The other cup told a quieter story. Dark stain on the rim. Tiny soot ring where the tea had cooled too long. A spoon rested across the saucer, handle pointing inward. Marple lifted it delicately. A faint residue clung near the bowl of the spoon, grey, crystalline. Not sugar. She looked up. "Who made the tea that night?" The constable frowned. The Reverend said his wife did. She often served evening tea before bed. "And who drank it?" He hesitated. "He said she did alone. He'd already gone to his study." Marple set the spoon down. "One cup suggests otherwise," she said. The clock ticked again, slow and even. Somewhere outside, a cart passed, the sound muffled by rain. She walked to the small shelf by the window, a tin of sugar, another of flour, and beside them an empty jar labeled extract. She opened it. The smell hit her immediately stronger now, unmistakable. Bitter almonds. She replaced the lid quietly. Her eyes returned to the table, to the contrast between cups, one spotless, one dead still. The room held its breath. Nothing moved. No one spoke. Miss Marple folded her gloves carefully. The faint trace of almond still hung in the air. She looked once more at the washed cup, then at the one left untouched. Her voice came low, almost to herself. "One tells the truth," she said. "The other hides it." She turned toward the door. "Now, whose cup was washed?" The rain had stopped by afternoon. The village streets glistened, puddles catching pale light. Miss Marple walked slowly toward High Street, shawl drawn close, mind turning over small details. Blank letter, broken chain, clean cup, each separate. Yet together, they whispered something unkind. "The jeweller's," bell chimed as she entered. A gentle sound, sharp in the quiet shop. Mr. Peake looked up from his bench, glasses slipping down his nose. He smiled faintly. "Miss Marple, always a pleasure." She nodded. "Good afternoon, Mr. Peake. You repaired a chain recently, I believe. Small, gold, delicate clasp." He frowned slightly. "Many chains pass through here, ma'am." "This one," she said, placing the little packet from Dr. Haddock on the counter. He lifted it delicately. "Yes, I remember, but not your usual customer." She tilted her head. "Not Mrs. Clement herself?" "No, ma'am. A lady brought it in last week. Said it was for the vicar's wife." Miss Marple waited. He adjusted his glasses. "Fine piece." Old clasp worn through. I replaced it, but she asked for quick work, paid cash. Didn't leave her name. Did she sign a receipt? He shook his head. Didn't want one. Said she'd collect it same day. Miss Marple's voice was mild. And she did? Yes. Came before closing. Wore a black shawl, if I recall. Thin hands, bit trembly. Seemed in a hurry. Miss Marple folded her gloved hands. Would that be Mrs. Holling, perhaps? Mr. Peake thought, eyes narrowing slightly. That's right. Teachers at the Sunday school. Quiet sort. I didn't think much of it then. Few of us do, Mr. Peake, she said softly. He laid the chain back on the cloth. Lovely little locket it was, too. Had a picture inside. Husband, I think. Or child. Marple's eyes lifted. You saw it? Just for a moment, when I checked the hinge. Faded photograph, oval cut. Still inside when she collected it? I assume so. I closed it myself after testing the clasp. She nodded slowly. Thank you. You've been very helpful. He hesitated. Is it serious, Miss Marple? They say the vicar's wife well. She gave a small smile. Truth is always serious, Mr. Peake, even when spoken quietly. Outside, the street smelled faintly of wet stone. She paused under the awning, looking down the lane toward the church spire. Her thoughts moved in clean lines, neat as stitches in cloth. Mrs. Holling, black shawl, cash payment, no record, no reason, unless the locket wasn't just repaired. She reached into her bag, unwrapped the chain once more. The gold caught the dull light. Her thumb pressed the catch. The hinge opened with a soft snap. Inside nothing, no photograph, no scrap of paper, just a hollow space where something once belonged. She closed it again, her expression unreadable. In the distance, a bell marked the hour. Its sound faded slowly across the rooftops. Miss Marple slipped the chain back into its paper fold. Her voice came quiet, almost to herself. The photo inside was missing. The door to Mrs. Holling's cottage opened before Miss Marple could knock twice. The widow stood there, thin and smiling, hands clasped tight around a dishcloth. Her kitchen smelled of polish and boiled cabbage. A clock ticked too loud for comfort. Miss Marple, dear, come in, come in. I heard you were helping the inspector. Such a dreadful business, isn't it? Her voice trembled, but her eyes darted quick, measuring every glance. Miss Marple stepped inside, removing her gloves. Yes, quite dreadful, though dreadful things are often tidier than we expect. Mrs. Holling's laugh came short, brittle. I don't know what to do with myself since it happened. I keep wiping things. Can't sit still. Her hands kept moving, rubbing at the edge of the table, though it was already shining. Miss Marple, Saturday. Her gaze moved around the neat little kitchen. Not a crumb out of place. Not a cup left unwashed. Only the scent of polish, sharp, clean, covering something else underneath. I wanted to ask, Miss Marple began softly, about the locket you kindly took to Mr. Peake last week. Mrs. Holling froze mid-motion. Oh, that? Yes, I did. Poor dear asked me to have it mended. She was busy with church things. I only polished it, truly. Polished? Yes, I cleaned it for her. I'm good with little repairs, you know. She trusted me. Her hands trembled slightly now. She folded them together to hide it. Miss Marple nodded gently. It's good to help friends. Did you notice what was inside it? Oh, nothing special. A picture, perhaps. I don't recall clearly. I didn't pry. Marple's tone stayed calm. She was quite attached to it. Strange that it should be empty now. Mrs. Holling blinked too fast. Empty? Oh, perhaps it fell out. Old glue, maybe. Such things happen. A moment passed. The clock ticked louder. Miss Marple folded her own hands on her lap. Mrs. Clement was also worried, you know, about the church accounts. The widow's fingers twitched. Her smile tightened. Oh, the accounts, yes. She mentioned them once or twice. Always so careful, bless her. Not everyone understands how collections are balanced, of course. Marple tilted her head. You do, though. Mrs. Holling blinked. I? Oh, I help with the choir funds sometimes, nothing else. Miss Marple's eyes were steady. The choir fund is separate, yet the same sums appear in both ledgers. I saw the handwriting myself. You write rather neatly, Mrs. Holling. The dishcloth fell from her hands. I only helped with small things, she whispered. Nothing improper. Miss Marple rose slowly. Her voice was gentle. I'm sure, but sometimes small things lead to large misunderstandings. She moved toward the door. Mrs. Holling stood still, the polish scent thick around her. Her hands trembled again, rubbing at nothing. At the threshold, Miss Marple turned once more. Her tone stayed calm, almost kind. You kept the books well, she said softly. Too well, perhaps. You knew the vicar's accounts too well. The church smelled faintly of polish and candle wax. Evening light pressed through the coloured glass, making dull patterns on the stone floor. Harold Fenn, the organist, sat at the piano bench, idly pressing a key now and then. The notes came out soft and uncertain, like words not meant to be heard. Miss Marple stood beside the pews. Busy afternoon, Mr. Fenn. He looked up quickly. Oh, Miss Marple, I was just running through the offertory hymn. You know how Slack hates mistakes at funerals. She smiled. Yes, though some mistakes hide more than they reveal. He coughed. Terrible business about the vicar's wife. Never thought I'd see such trouble here. His fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on the keys. People are saying dreadful things. They always do. Miss Marple moved closer. What sort of things, Mr. Fenn? He hesitated, enjoying the pause before gossip. Well, she wasn't herself lately. Always in and out of the vestry after hours. Sometimes with Mrs. Holling, sometimes alone. Lights burning late. Ledger books open. He leaned forward. I locked the church at 10. More than once. I found it unbolted again by morning. Miss Marple's tone stayed even. Strange. Did you mention it to the Reverend? He shrugged. He said she was keeping choir records. But I know numbers when I see them. Those weren't hymn sheets, those were account pages. He struck one soft note on the organ. It echoed faintly under the rafters. She looked troubled, he said after a moment. Once, I heard her crying. Said something about making it right before Sunday. I didn't pry. We all have our burdens. Miss Marple watched him closely. Did anyone else know she stayed late? Oh, yes, he said. Mrs. Holling, certainly. She often came back with her. Said they were sorting the choir money. I never asked. He lowered his voice. But I did see her Mrs. Clement received notes. Folded bits of paper. Someone left them under the vestry door. Anonymous? He nodded. Always the same thin paper. No name. I thought they were reminders for meetings. But she'd tear them up straight away. He frowned. Last week she burned one in the church stove. I smelled it when I came in. Paper and wax. She said it was rubbish. Yet she looked frightened. Miss Marple said nothing for a long moment. The air carried the faint tang of smoke still trapped in the stones. She thought of the blank letter, the empty locket, the washed cup. Each detail fit neatly into unease. Mr. Fenn sighed. Some secrets shouldn't stay in church, Miss Marple. They sour the air. She nodded slowly. Yes, and sometimes those who keep them are the first to fall. He struck another key, low and hollow. The note lingered, then faded into silence. Miss Marple turned toward the door. Her step light, her face unreadable. Behind her, the organ creaked once more. She paused just long enough to whisper, almost to herself. Someone feared exposure. The maid stood near the back door, hands twisting in her apron. Her name was Betty Crane, 17. Nervous, polite, loyal to the household she served. She looked at Miss Marple as though speaking might cause trouble to start all over again. It's only a little thing, ma'am, she said softly. Little things are the ones that matter, Miss Marple replied. They sat at the small kitchen table of the vicarage, where the smell of soap still hung thick in the air. The constable had left. The Reverend was out visiting parishioners. Only the sound of the clock broke the quiet. Betty swallowed hard. I didn't think of it till now. That night when it happened, I was upstairs sewing by the window. I heard voices. Voices? Yes, ma'am. The Reverend had gone to his study. I thought maybe she'd company again Mrs. Holling or one of the choir ladies. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Could you hear what they said? No, ma'am. Only the sound of cups. 2 of them. I know the clink when she pours tea. Always 2. Betty looked down at her hands. Then there was a noise, like something slipping, then a sharp crack. Something broke? Betty nodded. Yes, ma'am. A teacup. I heard her gasp, but no one called out. After that, quiet again. Only the clock. Miss Marple's eyes moved to the sideboard where 2 cups still sat, the same 2 she had studied before. One broken, she murmured. Betty hesitated. That's just it, ma'am. Next morning I looked. I never found the pieces. Miss Marple raised her brows slightly. No broken cup? No, ma'am. Only 1 cup washed. The other still full, cold. I thought she'd tidied it herself before bed. But then... She stopped, twisting the apron tighter. Go on, dear, Miss Marple said gently. I came down early. The Reverend was already in the kitchen. Stood by the sink, sleeves rolled up. He looked pale. I asked if he'd like breakfast. He said no. He was wiping his hands. Slow, steady, like he'd been scrubbing something. Miss Marple folded her gloves carefully. Did you see what he was cleaning? No, ma'am. Just the cloth. It was wet. The water in the basin had gone cloudy. I didn't ask. You noticed anything else? Betty thought a moment. There was a smell, she whispered. Sweet. Strange. Like almonds. I thought maybe soap, but it wasn't. It made my throat feel tight. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the girl. You've done well to tell me, Betty. You saw more than you think. The maid's eyes filled a little. I wish I hadn't heard it, ma'am. She was kind to me. I know, Miss Marple said softly. Kindness leaves traces too. The clock struck 5. The sound echoed through the empty rooms. Miss Marple rose, touching the table once before leaving. Her eyes swept over the cups again, the one clean, the other dark, motionless. She spoke half to herself, half to the quiet kitchen. 2 cups clinked, she said. Then one vanished. Her voice sank lower. The cup wasn't broken. It was missing. Miss Marple sat in her small sitting room. The rain had stopped. The village lay quiet again. A kettle whistled softly on the hob, its sound steady, almost thoughtful. She poured herself tea, then spoke aloud, her tone calm and measured, as if explaining a pattern of stitches. If the cup was replaced, she began, then the tea was tampered. She set the cup before her. 2 cups were poured. One remained untouched. One washed. Someone removed the evidence, not the accident. She paused. Tea is a simple thing, but poison hides well in ordinary comforts. She opened her notebook. Lines of her own tidy handwriting filled the page. She read them slowly. Blank. Letter. Broken clasp. Locked door. Her voice lowered. If the necklace was swapped, then the message was hidden. Not the jewelry, but what it contained. Her eyes drifted toward the small locket on her table. The clasp gleamed faintly in the afternoon light. She touched it with one finger. Inside was once a photograph. Not of her husband, I think. Perhaps of someone else. Someone she meant to protect or expose. The kettle clicked as it cooled. She looked toward the window. Mrs. Holling took the chain to be mended. Paid in cash. No name. And the picture inside vanished. Why replace the clasp unless you wish to remove something? Her eyes narrowed slightly. The locket was the message, not the paper. She turned the page. Now, the door. Her pencil tapped against the words. If the door was relocked, then the killer left last. She said it quietly, almost tenderly. She did not fall. She did not faint. She was carried down, seated, arranged. A door closed after her, locked from outside. She leaned back in her chair, hands folded. Who could lock the parsonage cellar? Who carried keys? Her gaze flicked to the list she'd written that morning. Reverend Clement. Betty. Mrs. Holling. The constable on call. Her voice grew softer. The maid would not. The constable arrived too late. Mrs. Holling had no reason to open that door, unless she had help. She stopped. Her expression changed just slightly, as if a thought had taken shape. Help or permission. The sound of the ticking clock filled the room. Each second seemed louder now. She looked again at the words she had written. Every clue fitted another, cleanly, tightly. Nothing left loose. She repeated it once more, slower, firmer. If the cup was replaced, the tea was poisoned. If the necklace was changed, the truth was hidden. If the door was locked, the murderer left last. She closed the notebook. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Such puzzles are never about strength, she said. They're about access. The clock struck 6. Outside, a single bird called, sharp against the quiet. Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. Her hand brushed against the edge of the notebook. Her eyes lingered on the final line. And only one, she murmured, had the keys to every door. The rectory study was dim and airless, curtains half drawn, the fire unlit. Dust settled on the edge of the desk, where a sermon draft waited, its ink dried mid-sentence. Miss Marple stood by the door a moment, letting her eyes adjust. The room smelled faintly of old paper and candle grease. She moved slowly, noticing what others had missed. A pen left uncapped, a drawer half closed, a sheet of blotting paper with faint impressions beneath it. She touched the marks with her fingertip, loops, lines, initials. Not the Reverend's hand. The ledger sat to one side, heavy and neat. She pulled it toward her, opened the cover. The first few pages were ordinary enough. Collections, expenditures, small sums for choir repairs. But halfway through, the handwriting shifted neater, sharper, less hesitant. Not the Reverend's round script, someone else's. She traced the initials with a gloved finger. E.C., Emily Clement. Written on every check, every line, but not in her hand. The strokes too firm, the spacing wrong. Someone had copied her name with care, but not with truth. She tried the lower drawer. It resisted. A gentle tug brought it open only an inch. Something jammed behind it. She bent closer, pulling softly until the old wood gave a tired creak. Inside, a stack of cancelled checks tied with faded string. She unwrapped them one by one, all signed E.C., all made out to cash, all dated within the last month. Every signature steady, deliberate, false. The Reverend's neat handwriting filled the pay lines. The amount small, £2, £3, £5, just enough to pass unnoticed. She looked up at the empty chair by the desk. The truth always sat quietly, waiting to be seen. She imagined Mrs. Clement here a week ago, opening the same drawer, finding the same bundle. Her neat fingers resting on the forged name that wasn't hers. Her calm heart quickening, her mind deciding what must come next. Miss Marple closed the ledger gently. She replaced the checks exactly as they were, but her thoughts had already moved ahead. The Reverend's tired eyes, Mrs. Holling's shaking hands, the gas in the cellar, the door relocked. Each thread pulled toward the same knot. She crossed to the window and opened it slightly. Cold air drifted in, bringing a faint smell of wet earth. It cleared the stillness, made it sharper. Truth had weight, she thought, but also a kind of peace once found. Her gaze moved back to the desk. She spoke softly, as if to the empty room itself. She came here that night. She said. She opened this drawer. She saw her own name forged. Her eyes lowered to the string-tied bundle once more. She would have gone to the cellar after that to think, perhaps, to confront. The clock on the mantel ticked once, loud in the quiet. Miss Marple drew in a slow breath, her tone calm, final. Mrs. Clement had found the truth. The church was nearly empty. Evening light bled through the stained glass in dull streaks. The scent of lilies hung in the air, sweet, cloying, too heavy for peace. Miss Marple's steps echoed softly as she entered. At the far end, near the altar, Mrs. Holling stood arranging flowers. Her shawl hung loose. Her hands moved with care, but not calm. Each stem cut too quickly, too short. Miss Marple watched in silence for a moment, then spoke gently. "It's late for church work, Mrs. Holling." The widow flinched, then forced a smile. "Evening service tomorrow, Miss Marple. Best to finish now," the Reverend asked. "Me." Her voice quivered on the last word. Miss Marple moved closer. "I see, though you seem rather restless for a simple task." Mrs. Holling's scissors paused mid-air. "I'm only tired," she said. "We're all tired, aren't we? It's been dreadful." "Poor Mrs. Clement." "Yes," Miss Marple replied softly. "Poor indeed, and so careful with her ledgers." The scissors slipped. A petal tore away. Mrs. Holling didn't look up. "I wouldn't know about ledgers," she said quickly. "I only helped with hymns." Miss Marple's tone stayed calm. "Yet the handwriting in both books is the same. The choir funds and the church account. The same hand. Yours." The widow froze. Silence filled the air, broken only by the faint hum of the organ pipes cooling in the dark. She turned slowly. "You're mistaken." Miss Marple stepped closer. "Then tell me, why did Mrs. Clement find checks signed with her name but written by another hand?" Mrs. Holling's mouth opened, then closed again. Her voice came small. "She wanted to ruin me. She didn't understand. It was only a loan. Just a few pounds. I would have replaced it. Before or after she died?" Miss Marple's question came softly like a sigh. The widow trembled. Tears welled but didn't fall. She was going to tell the Reverend. "I couldn't let her. You don't know what that would have done to me. The shame, the talk." Miss Marple looked toward the altar candles. "Poison in tea is quiet, isn't it? No struggle, no sound, just sweetness, then stillness." Mrs. Holling gripped the table, breath coming fast. "She begged me for a drink before bed. I only meant to calm her nerves. Just a few drops in her cup. I thought it would make her sleep." Miss Marple's eyes stayed steady. "But you washed the wrong cup." The widow looked up sharply. "What?" "She poured for two. You and her. You cleaned one yours. You left hers. But she switched them by mistake when she set down the tray." Mrs. Holling's face went pale. Her lips moved soundlessly. Miss Marple's voice remained quiet, almost kind. "She died, believing the tea was yours." The widow's knees weakened. Her scissors fell to the floor, clattering once, then still. Miss Marple took a step back, leaving the silence to settle between them. "Confession," she said softly, "is easier before the bells begin." Mrs. Holling sank to the pew, face in her hands. The lilies beside her drooped under their own scent. Miss Marple turned toward the door. Her words lingered in the fading air. "But she forgot," she whispered. "Who else shared the cup?" The church door creaked softly. Inspector Slack entered, his boots echoing on the stone floor. 2 constables followed, quiet, hesitant, unsure if the worst had already been spoken. Miss Marple stood near the aisle, her hands folded neatly before her. Mrs. Holling sat slumped in the front pew, shawl slipping from her shoulders. The lily's scent clung to the air, sweet, oppressive, almost sickening. Slack looked from one woman to the other. "Well?" he asked. Miss Marple didn't answer. She only turned slightly toward the altar. Her gaze rested on the trembling widow. "Mrs. Holling," she said softly, "perhaps now you'll tell him what you told me." The widow lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were rimmed red. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Slack frowned, impatient. "What's this, then? More talk of teacups and poison?" Miss Marple's tone stayed level. "No more talk, Inspector. Only truth." She nodded once, gently. "Go on, Mrs. Holling." The widow's fingers twisted together, white at the knuckles. "I didn't mean for her to die," she whispered. "It was only to stop her from talking. She said she'd show the ledger to the bishop. I couldn't face it. I just wanted her quiet. Just for one night." Slack's pencil scratched against his pad. "What did you give her?" Mrs. Holling swallowed. "Laurel drops. From my cupboard. I used them for nerves." Her eyes flicked toward the altar candles. "She made the tea. I only stirred it." Slack stepped closer. "You stirred both cups?" She nodded weakly. "Yes. But she moved them when I wasn't looking. We talked. She forgave me, you know." Her voice cracked. "She said the money didn't matter. Only honesty before God. I thought she was mocking me, but she wasn't. Miss Marple's face stayed calm, her expression unreadable. She prayed for you, she said quietly. Even then. The widow's hands dropped to her lap. Tears fell silently. I felt her hand on mine, she whispered. She told me to rest easy. She said truth always finds its way through small doors. Slack closed his notebook. His tone softened despite himself. You've signed your own guilt, madam. You'll come with us now. Mrs. Holling didn't move. Her voice came faint, almost peaceful. I suppose I will. It's better this way. The waiting was worse. Her gaze shifted to Miss Marple. You knew all along. Miss Marple nodded once. I knew when I smelled almonds in a room that should have smelled of tea. Slack gave the signal. The constable stepped forward. The widow stood shakily, her head bowed. As they led her past, she stopped for a moment beside Miss Marple. She prayed for me even then, she whispered again, her breath trembling. The church grew still. Only the faint rustle of uniform cloth broke the air. Miss Marple did not move. Her eyes followed the widow until the doors closed behind her. Slack turned toward her. Well, that's that then. Another case for your list, Miss Marple. She said nothing. The candles flickered. Outside, the evening bell began to toll. Miss Marple's gaze stayed on the empty pew where Mrs. Holling had knelt, her hands folded tighter. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, heavy with understanding. Justice never feels like victory, Inspector. Her eyes lowered, soft with thought. Marple's eyes held only sorrow. Morning came softly over Street Mary Mead. The mist hung low across the gardens. Birds moved in the hedges, quiet at first, then louder as the light grew. Inside Miss Marple's cottage, the kettle hummed on the stove. The scent of tea drifted through the open window, warm and steady. Lady Bantry sat opposite her, shawl around her shoulders. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She stared at the cup between her hands as though it might explain the night before. It's strange, she said quietly. I knew Mrs. Holling for 20 years. I never imagined. Miss Marple poured the tea, slow and careful. People often surprise us, Dolly. That's what makes life both sweet and sorrowful. Lady Bantry sighed. I can't stop thinking of it. Poison, ledgers, forgery, right here in our own parish. It feels wrong, so near to hymns and lilies. Miss Marple stirred her tea without hurry. Wrong things often prefer good company, she said gently. They hide where they feel safe. She looked out the window. Children's voices floated faintly from the lane, light and distant. The sound made the silence easier to bear. Lady Bantry shook her head. She prayed for her, even as she died. That's what the inspector said. I don't think I could have done it. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Goodness may hide weakness, my dear. Evil hides fear. In between, there are all of us just trying to do right before the night comes again. Lady Bantry looked up. Do you really think Mrs. Holling was afraid? Yes, Miss Marple said softly. Afraid of losing her place, her comfort, her appearance of goodness. People will do terrible things to keep the mask from slipping. She sipped her tea. The cup clicked lightly as she set it down. Lady Bantry leaned back, eyes thoughtful. The Reverend said she begged forgiveness before they took her. He granted it. Miss Marple nodded. That will give him peace. But forgiveness and understanding are not the same thing. We can forgive without ever understanding why. The two women sat in quiet for a long time. A bell tolled from the church across the green. Once, twice, measured, calm. The sound rolled through the open window, mixing with the scent of tea and damp morning air. Lady Bantry sighed again. What will become of him now, Jane? Miss Marple's gaze stayed on the garden outside. Time will heal him, perhaps, but the heart rarely forgets the shape of deceit. She reached for the teapot, refilled both cups, and spoke almost in a whisper. Life moves on, Dolly, even in a village like ours, but truth never really leaves. Lady Bantry looked down into her cup. The steam rose gently, curling like sound breath. Neither woman spoke again. The bell tolled once more, deeper this time. Miss Marple watched the ripples of tea settle, her eyes distant, reflective. In the stillness that followed, her voice came soft, barely above the hush of morning. "And somewhere," she murmured, "someone else hides behind kindness, waiting to be found." The bell faded. The air stood still. Only the quiet, moral weight of her words remained lingering, like the last curl of steam. Davis's voice returns, gentle and familiar. "My friends, as you sip your tea tonight, tell me what clue would you have noticed first?" He pauses, the sound of a cup settling softly on wood. Was it the letter under the sugar bowl, the locket with no picture, or the cup that vanished before morning? A smile in his tone. Share your thoughts below, and if tonight's mystery stirred your curiosity, don't forget to subscribe. A calm breath. Tomorrow, another kettle will boil. Davis's voice lowers, soft as dusk. Next time in Street Marymead, a wedding ring found in a frozen pond. A quiet pause, the sound of wind against glass. And a name. No one remembers. He lets the silence linger, warm and mysterious. Will Miss Marple see what others overlook, or will the past keep its hold beneath the ice? A faint clink of a teacup. Stay close, friends. The kettle's never cold here. Soft fade. Algorithmic continuity hums on.